Rosie, can I dive in or do you want to share anything before we start?
My God, this is your rodeo, Mark. Go for
Okay.
it.
Morning, everybody. Great to see like 10 of your faces and then like 30 of your names. I'm going to try my best to guilt and shame as many of you into showing your faces as I can, because and I'm not above using guilt and shame in this way. Um, because I have realized as much as I love teaching and trainings, Jenny, that's too much. As much as I love teachings and trainings, I've realized a lot of what I love about it is the in-person interaction. So Zoom obviously limits that, but if I can see your face, I think that helps. So if you're willing, that would be great. I need 2 volunteers to kick us off. Natasha, this is my second Zoom of the day with Natasha, and on my first one, I didn't get to meet Sky. So everybody meet Sky. There she is. Oh my gosh, there's nothing like that.
Just keep it this morning, so I'm just gonna bounce.
So my icebreaker question is I want to know how many of you, and you can either comment in the chat or show me your video and raise your hand, which is going to be difficult to see because I'm on 2 screens. How many of you either wrote or received an offer on Thanksgiving Day? How many of you wrote or received an offer on Thanksgiving Day? I'm watching in the chat. Looks like I saw 1 hand, 2 hands, I think, go up. There's 3. I actually kind of thought it would be more than 3. There we go. I was asking that question because one of the members of my team was writing an offer on a property for a multiple offer situation. And I just like realtors never cease to amaze me in the way that we think about like our work schedule and days and times. They had a buyer buy a house that was a mid 200,000s 3-bed 2-bath house. So think about like if there's a definition of a house that's moving quickly right now, it's this one. Decent neighborhood, 3-bed 2-bath, mid 200s, listed on Wednesday afternoon, and was in a multiple offer situation on Thanksgiving Day. And I was like, man, I mean, I know we're all hard workers, but Thanksgiving is Thanksgiving. So I hope you all had a great week somehow. I know many of you were ending up working some of that day, and it probably wasn't the Thanksgiving you had hoped for, but thanks for being willing to dedicate some of your time in between Thanksgiving and Christmas to this class. I know 4 90-minute sections of time, that's super valuable. I know that that's a big commitment, and 6 hours in the life of a realtor, there's a lot of money to be made in 6 hours. Y'all are really good at what you do. You make, many of you make very good money. Those of you that don't are probably on your way to doing that. And I just want to acknowledge that 6 hours of time needs to have a payoff. So I really hope that this class can help you think something that you haven't thought before. And it's going to be different for all of us because y'all are at very different points on the spectrum of how much you've been taught about this, how much personal experience do you have, your family backstory. For as much as you may have read or been in a academic setting talking about business or money, without a doubt, the greatest influence in how you think about money is your family of origin. How did your guardians think about and behave with money is the most consistent indicator to how you're going to think and behave about money regardless of what you've been taught since then. So all those variables come into play. Your stage in career, obviously, some of you, we have people that are 15 years plus in real estate. We have people that are in their first year. So all that's going to put you in very different places. My hope is that there's at least a couple things that are going to be of value for each of you by the end of 4 sessions. We are going to record all these, so if you can't join for some of a day or one of the days, don't worry about that. Hopefully the content will still be helpful. And I would also say, I know many of you have either finished or at least started Rich Dad Poor Dad. I'm going to suggest a couple other books along the way. If one of the results of attending the class is that you engage with some or all of those books, that's fantastic, because there are very accessible resources that will do a better job than I can in teaching some of these principles. So I don't claim to have this patent on these things. They've been very helpful for me, and so I might be able to help apply or relay them to you and encourage you to engage in them and talk about them together. But if you can engage in the content, kind of the original source content from a lot of these books, I think you'll find that helpful. So I'm going to start by, Rosie, can you give me a screen share possibility here? I'm going to start by just taking a quick look at our outline for 4 sessions and where we're going to go. If you didn't see the email from me this morning, I shared the Google Doc so that if you wanted to go in and copy and paste this into whatever sort of file you like to use and use it to take your own notes, go for it. I can find that helpful to do with an outline. But I'm going to share my screen and take a look at the outline just so you can kind of see where we're headed during the 4 sessions. So we're going to start today by talking about the problem. What do I mean by financial literacy? Why do I think it's lacking? Taking a look at the result of the lack of financial literacy. We're going to talk about Rich Dad Poor Dad, which we will talk about Rich Dad Poor Dad in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th classes, but we'll probably talk more about it specifically today. And if you've read it, great. I think you'll find it more helpful. If you haven't read it, this class just might be an encouragement to you that, okay, I get the high level, and then I can circle back to reading it. And today we're going to talk about why this matters specifically for realtors. In the 2nd session, we're going to really dive into business financial statements. We're going to talk about a profit loss. We're going to look at an actual profit loss. We're going to talk about a balance sheet, look at an actual balance sheet, and then talk about the difference between the two and why understanding the difference between the two matters a lot as a business owner. It's not just academic information. It's crucial to understanding how to make decisions as a business owner. They're key concepts that aren't super complex, but aren't a part of our everyday learning experience either. And then we're going to look at what a balance sheet looks like for an individual, which is called a personal financial statement. The why and how behind a personal financial statement. Some of you have a personal financial statement, some of you don't. Actually, it's probably accurate to say you all have a personal financial statement. Some of you have it down on paper and some of you don't. So we'll talk about why that matters and how you can and should be using it as a realtor. Session 3, we're going to dive a little bit more into why the difference between profit loss and balance sheet is so crucial. We're going to take a look at how spending money isn't just spending money, that as a business owner, you should be thinking about investment rather than expense. And that I think as realtors, we set goals in terms of income rather than net worth. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about taxes, which is super fun, but something that realtors, I think, largely ignore. We're going to talk about whether you invest in real estate yourself, why or why not, and then using debt as a leverage tool. So 3rd session, kind of diving a little bit past the balance and profit loss. 4th session, I'm going to ask, by the end of this 4-session class, that each of you prove to me that you have a personal financial statement, that you have electronically created one. Now, FYI, I'm not going to require that you show me the numbers. If you want to, you feel safe doing that, you feel comfortable doing that, and I can be helpful, I am more than happy to look at your actual personal financial statement, but I am going to ask you to send me at least a blacked out version. A mentor of mine years ago suggested I do one and then forced me to do one. And I'm going to come back to this, but so allow me to patronize you a little bit and say, by the fourth class, I am going to ask you to submit an assignment, which is to send me proof that you have made a personal financial statement. I'm not going to grade you on it, but I'm going to hold you accountable to it. Because I think if you don't have one created by the end of these 4 sessions, something didn't work. Okay. Then we're going to talk about what your personal goal is. Notice that in session 3, we're talking about setting goals as income versus net worth. So we're going to circle back to that in session 4 and to try to apply that to you personally, to say, what is your goal? And then I'm hoping to leave a pretty decent chunk of time in the 4th session to do Q&A. That doesn't mean we're not going to do Q&A in sessions 1, 2, and 3. I want to take quick breaks as we transition from topic to topic to let you all ask questions. I for sure want this to be interactive via video or chat. So we're going to do that each time, but just know that we are going to have a significant amount of time for Q&A. So if something strikes you in any of the sessions that you're thinking, this isn't directly related to what we're talking about right now, but yet it feels relevant, do me a favor and jot that down, make mental note or make actual note, so that at the end of session 4, we can for sure come back to that. I wrote down the name of the 3 books that I'm going to suggest as alternative reading. So I asked that you take a look at Rich Dad, Poor Dad prior. Some of you have probably read Richest Man in Babylon, The Millionaire Next Door, Think and Grow Rich. I joke about this with anybody I recommend these books to, and y'all have heard me say this before. I just want to say in another context, another day and another time, I would be happy to recommend books to you that are high quality literature that will form you as a person in other ways. These books are not high quality literature in the sense of they're not winning awards for their these aren't all-star English students, right, that wrote these books. All 4 of the books that I'm recommending, I believe, are extraordinarily effective. They have principles that we don't talk about in other settings. And so if you go into them with the right expectations, which is you're probably going to cringe a couple times at the cheesiness or the lack of literary quality. But if you know that going in and say, I'm reading this to challenge the way that I think about money. Because if you go into it with that expectation, I don't care how smart you are, they will challenge the way that you think about money. And I think that's really healthy. Okay. So I might be, thank you, Jenny. No, I don't think there's any golf fairy godmothers in any of these books like there is in Raving Fans. But I would just encourage you that if you can kind of embrace that cheesiness and take a look at these, they will change your mind about some really key concepts. I'm even willing to use the word life-changing because I think that they really have been that for a lot of people. Okay, so if you want to use that outline, take the time to click on that link in the email I sent this morning, copy and paste it to whatever file you want to do. Go for that. But I'm going to go ahead and dive into session 1. If something comes up and you have a question as I'm talking, feel free to just go ahead and drop it into the chat. And like every 20 minutes or so, I'm going to make sure I check to see if you have a question. So don't worry about interrupting or distracting me. If you want to drop something in the chat, go ahead and do that. So what's the problem that would cause me to suggest all of you take 6 hours of your time? What's the problem that we're trying to solve? The problem is financial illiteracy. For being an extraordinarily educated economy or place and time, which, look, we can critique the amount of education that we have, and I'm not suggesting that our country or our time and place is the most educated, but we do spend a significant chunk of our life, of our time, of our energy being educated. And for the amount of energy that goes into that, myself, I'm in my 40th years. I look back for 40 years. I would say I believe there is a significant gap in the amount of time and energy spent educating people about money. And I'm not going to make some grand claim to have the answer to changing the philosophical education model that we use, because I'm not smart enough, I'm not informed enough to try to, in this context, advocate that education model needs to change. I am only saying that if you look at the amount of time and energy we invest in our culture into the formation and education of a human being, and try to allocate how many books or how many lectures or how many assignments were specifically dedicated to financial literacy in our education system, the answer is usually 0 or very close to 0, even into post-secondary education. And this is not just a hypothetical question. I would love for your answers. If an 18-year-old, so I'm using the United States as our context, several of you did not grow up in the United States, but if an 18-year-old in the United States has received a lot of financial education, where did they receive that?
Their parents.
Yeah, Rosie said their parents. I saw Angelica. It looks like she said at home, I think. Yeah, Brittany says at home. Absolutely. And so I can't make a broad statement about to what degree you all have been financially educated or to the quality of the financial education. I can just say that, broadly speaking, as a culture, we have intentionally or unintentionally delegated financial education to parents, grandparents, guardians, mentors. Yeah, Joel says mentors, people outside of the education context. And I think one of the outcomes of that is it's a reciprocation of financial education that stays with a particularly small segment of our culture. So that was a deep statement. What I mean by that is that if we've delegated financial literacy to guardians, who as a kid, who's going to be able to get solid financial literacy? It's only the children that grow up in an environment where they have an adult that has educated themselves, right? And so, broadly speaking, I think our culture produces highly educated people that have not been educated about financial literacy. And I think there's one exception to education about financial literacy. I'm going to come back to that. But so my hypothesis here, guys, is that even people graduating from post-secondary education have a significant gap in financial literacy, and that becomes particularly relevant to people that end up as small business owners, like the majority of you. Okay, so that's my hypothesis. You could have graduate level education, and I would still bet money that you have a significant gap in the financial education that you've received, and now you're a small business owner. That's a problem. And I just want to say, this isn't your fault. I don't think this is any individual's fault. So I'm not trying to make a value statement about that. I'm just saying that's the problem. That's the gap. If you did receive some education on financial, let's say at some point you had a class about money, high school, college, maybe pre-high school. Some of you probably did, maybe even in like home economics. Did y'all have home economics in your high school? We did in mine. What was the specific content? If you had a class about money, what did it teach you? Could you boil it down to one word? You had macroeconomics. That's good. Macro econ can be very philosophical and heady. I find it interesting. Cooking. So funny. Yes. 3 of you just nailed what I was going for here, because I believe this is very common. Silva said shopping. Tatum said budget. Rosie said budget. Ooh, Steph, you had a bad session on student loans. At least you had a session, I guess. Most of us probably didn't. So I'm going to try to create a clarifier here that this is going to become a theme throughout these 4 sessions. The difference between budgeting and wealth. If you've received some sort of class on finances, it was likely a lesson on budgeting. What is budgeting? Budgeting is making sure the money coming in to your table matches or exceeds the money coming out. Fair definition of budgeting? And at some point, you all probably had some at least lecture about that as you were being educated. Yes, Dave Ramsey. Can we talk about Dave Ramsey? I'm going to try to avoid talking about Dave Ramsey because I'm not a fan. I understand he's had some positive impact, and I'm not trying to beat that up. Dave Ramsey teaches budgeting, and he further conditions the minds of his listeners to think about money in the way that the 9th grader who got the lesson about budgeting thinks about money, which is money is a 30-day context asset. Okay, so this is going to become a theme, and I hope you catch this by the end. But so here's the alternative perspective. Most of you, if you've had a class, you learned about budgeting. Budgeting thinks about money in 30-day contexts. We've been trained this way. I'm going to try to shake this loose from you, but we've been trained to think about money as, what do I earn every 30 days? And what do I spend every 30 days? I'm going to give you a couple examples of this. This is what you were taught when you were in 9th grade. This is what Dave Ramsey is going to try to beat into your head, that our definition of being good with money is making sure that there's a sizable gap between what we make every 30 days and what we spend every 30 days. Okay. I used to be in the car business. My family's been in the car business for like 65 years. I worked in it for a couple of years. When a car salesperson walks up to a customer on the lot, can y'all picture yourself as the customer? Okay. A salesperson walks up to you and says, "What's your budget?" What are they wanting you to say? Angelica says hi. They are wanting you to say something hi. That's true. But specifically, what are they asking you when they say, what's your budget?
How much you're willing to spend?
A number per month.
Yes. Silva's right. They're hoping you say, my budget's about $500 a month. Yeah, Billy's monthly payment. Think about that for a moment. And I'm not trying to make too much of this one example, but it's a really good illustration for how our culture thinks about money. They want you to say a monthly budget because they know that's the way to maximize what you spend. And look, I used to sell cars, so I'm not like anti-car salesperson. But if a consumer says, well, my budget's about $25,000, the salesperson knows, guys, I'm telling you this, they know, I'm going to make less money on this deal. It's just a reality. I don't know if it's a secret of the car business. A salesperson can immediately tell whether you're going to be a really valuable customer or not so valuable customer by how you answer that question. If you say $500 a month, which is, by the way, about a $25,000 car versus $25,000, the salesperson knows they're likely to make more or less on that transaction because of how you're thinking about money. And then like, hey, look, you shouldn't think to yourself, oh my, yeah, Joel, you did sell cars too. Thanks for backing me up, Joel. Now you are like, I like Joel and Mark a little bit less than I did 10 minutes ago. That's fair. Sorry, Joel, but that's the reality. You guys see this in terms of people buying houses, right? We see it every day. I think there is a bit more likelihood in the process of buying a house and getting a mortgage that people are thinking about the purchase price of the house versus their monthly payment. But I also think that's probably because the typical home buyer is a smaller section of our culture than the typical car buyer. And people buy homes less often. But again, I don't want to harp too much on that one example, but I'm going to throw out a couple examples to help you realize we think about money in 30-day chunks of time, and we don't benefit from that. So I'm not like conspiracy theory here, but I'm using the car business illustration to point out that the more the consumer thinks about money in 30-day stretches of time, who benefits from that? It's the people that are thinking about money in terms of a lifetime. And that's, if I could change one thing, so if my hypothesis is there is a lack of financial literacy, if I could boil it down to one thing that I would want to change in the mindset of a friend of mine about money, and this is what a mentor of mine, by the way, sorry for the aside here, but I grew up as a third generation small business owner. My grandfather was a small business owner. My dad was a small business owner. I had just about every, I had just about every privilege that you could have financially, economically, growing up as a kid. Okay. But it was in my 20s that a mentor of mine, when I lived in Lafayette, Indiana, got a hold of my thinking about money and said, you're absolutely missing it. You got to rethink this whole thing. And I don't hold that against my mom and dad. In most definitions, my dad is very intelligent with money. My dad still doesn't get this. And so this came later in life for me, and I'm still learning it. I don't get it. But I grew up in an environment that still thought about money in 30-day context. So if I could change one thing for friends of mine, it would be that they would stop using 30-day periods of time as their primary context to think about money. The alternative mindset to that is to think about money over the course of a lifetime. Another way to say that is that they think about money as wealth. And I want to put this out there. We're going to talk about Rich Dad Poor Dad a little bit, and this is, I think, going to come up. When I say the word wealth, do any of you have like a little bit of a negative internal reaction? Just want to acknowledge this. I'm getting 2 nods. I'm seeing at least 4 nods now. Thank you. I'd venture a guess that something like half of you. The word wealth has a little bit of a negative context. Can we just address this for a moment? Some of you that nodded, would any of you be willing to unmute yourself and just try to articulate where does that come from? Why does that word carry a negative context? Tyler says envy. Okay, good. Tyler, I think what you're getting at there is the word wealth comes with like a comparison. Yeah, okay, good. Michelle says greed. Michelle, those words are associated for you. You're not like internally, you hear wealth, you think and feel greed. Fair? Okay, somebody else that nodded, unmute yourself, and why the negative?
I think because of a culture where the wealthy build higher walls instead of longer tables.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, I grew up really poor. And so I think there was kind of like an us versus them thing of like, oh, the wealthy are like stealing from us, like poor. You know, there's just like a lot of negative like battles going on psychologically there.
My family's very blue collar. My dad works for IPL. Everyone in my family's been very blue collar for a long time. So like when you talk about wealthy people and like sides of town they live on, it's always just been like a really negative thing. Like my dad has called Castleton Hasselton for literally years because he like just hates like anything that is so different than us, I guess.
I will definitely be using that term from now on to describe Castleton. Thank you, Steph.
You could, you could just use it as that just for like traffic, but yeah.
Yes. Yes. Lance articulated in the chat something very similar to what Rosie said. Anyone with presumed wealth were perceived as folks who took advantage of others to get where they were. Thank you, Lance. That's great. Jenny, what were you going to say?
I just think that wealth, like identifying with that term just feels presumptuous, even if you technically are wealthy. Like everyone in this room, if you put it on a global scale, we're all wealthy. Mm-hmm. So we all want to slide the scale so that it's not us. Even if you are wealthy, you want to say, well, I'm not wealthy, I'm not built, you know, so I think we all just don't want, because there are so many parallels with like the wealthy being bad people. So we don't want to be categorized that way, even though globally, every person in this room, you know, most of people in the United States would be considered wealthy globally. Mm-hmm. And it's very relative. Wealth is incredibly relative. And so you can always push it off if it's something you don't want to identify with.
Brittany and Cameron both commented here. Thank you for those. That's really great. You guys both kind of got at the same thing. Brittany says inaccessible. Cameron says my natural reaction isn't so much negative as it is unrealistic. So that they're using the word wealth can feel like an unattainable thing. Laura questions motives when wealth comes up. That's good. Angelica can I ask you to dive a little bit in? I love, Angelica says, I've had to actively restructure my feelings around that language or word. That's a profound statement. Would you be willing to verbalize a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so all of the books on your list I've already read. And I read a lot of just like mindset books and stuff like that. And it's just something I have to, my natural reaction was the same as some of the people on here right now, for most of my life until probably like the last couple years. When I don't really know how to explain it, but I just feel like if there's something that you're holding a negative connotation in your mind about, then you're automatically not going to want to move in the direction of what that is.
Yes.
So if we think about wealth as being negative, you're not gonna want to move in the direction of wealth. So I've like actively given it a more positive connotation, even though that's not necessarily what my natural reaction has been for most of my life.
I feel like I could just end the Zoom right now. That would actually be a really great. Rosie's like, no, you probably should. You should probably end it right now. No, Angelica, thank you. I think that is, yes, mic drop. That is so well said. And this is why I'm asking, because I know the internal reaction that many of you have to that word, because it's the same one I had when I was in my early 20s. And a mentor of mine, guys, this was a profound experience. So I came out of college, let's just have real talk here for a second. I came out of college as a very privileged person in just about every context. Okay? If you want to know more about what I mean by that, I'm happy to tell you. But you name a spectrum of privilege, and I was probably pretty high on just about every one of them. Okay? And I felt guilty. I wouldn't have articulated that. I would have never said that to my parents. But I didn't know how to feel about a lot of that privilege. One of my reactions to that was that I was particularly attracted to a very low paying job with a nonprofit. Okay, so I took that job, and this is not the only reasons that people take jobs like this, by the way, and it's not the only reason I took the job, but it did influence my decision. I now know that. About 3 years into that job, that organization's largest donor in that community had become a very good friend and mentor of mine. And he was insightful enough to ask me a lot of questions about my perspective of wealth, and he kept pushing. Because what he knew to be true is that while I would gladly accept his very large donations every year, I had a quiet or subconscious negative opinion of his wealth. He was a really smart guy. I never said anything to him verbally, but he knew it. He knew enough about my background, and he probably heard me talking about money enough. And one day he called me out on it. And I was eating breakfast with him. I'll never forget this conversation. And what he said is, you are gonna have to come to like a reckoning with your perspective of the word wealth. And most people won't come to that reckoning because they'd rather not. And I'm not suggesting you're going to end up agreeing with anybody else here in this setting about this kind of reckoning with the word wealth. But I think a lot of you, to really get value of what we're going to talk about over the next like 3.5 sessions, you are going to have to kind of come to terms with, why do I have that negative reaction? What's behind that? And if I subconsciously have that negative reaction, I will do everything in my power as a human to move away from the subconscious negative. And I'm not saying you, again, you don't have to agree with anybody on here, but I'm at least going to challenge you to engage with why you think that, or to what degree do you think that. We're all in different places, so that you can at least open up possibilities, okay? To rethink the word wealth, to rethink money, you have to be willing to look at it differently than you have in the past. Laura hit on motives. I think Michelle said greed. Tyler said envy. You can probably see where this is headed. Wealth is associated with taking. That's, I think, if I could, in one sentence, articulate why I think most people have a negative reaction, is that in a lot of cases, they associate wealth to taking something. Tyler says, I don't agree, which I think means I agree with Tyler, because I don't agree with that statement either. What I'm going to suggest you do is recalibrate your mind to wealth is about creating. We don't have time in this context to dive into what the zero-sum fallacy is or scarcity thinking, but just boiled down, it's a part of rethinking wealth has to be rethinking, are there a set number of dollars or set amount of wealth or set number of resources that exist in the world, so that I'm just going to use me and Rosie, because on the screen here, we're the first two that I see, that if Rosie and I were the only two people that existed, for me to become wealthy, does that mean Rosie has to become less wealthy? A scarcity mindset, a zero-sum mindset, says that we're on opposite sides of a fixed formula, for you math nerds, and that the only way to affect one side of the formula is to opposite equally affect the other side of the formula, correct? Y'all remember your algebra lessons? That's zero-sum thinking, it's scarcity thinking, and I'm telling you, it somehow has crept into the way that you think about money and wealth. Even the most abundant people that could articulate and write a thesis about why the zero-sum fallacy is not true, it still pervades in their thinking somehow. And so I just want to acknowledge that I think to be morally and ethically embracing of wealth, you have to tackle this question. And this talking about a profit and loss statement and a balance sheet is going to be very limited in its impact if, as a human being, you aren't kind of willing to tackle this. What are my presuppositions about wealth? What do I subconsciously believe about wealth and thinking about money? Because if you think accumulating wealth comes at someone else's expense, you're a decent human being, you're going to be more comfortable thinking about money in 30-day spans of time. Because budgeting, me setting a solid budget, doesn't require me to think about what Rosie's losing by me setting a solid budget, even if I'm a scarcity thinker. For me to think about wealth and to think about money in terms of lifetime accumulation and the use of wealth in that way, I have to tackle that question. I have to think about it a lot. So I don't know if any of you were like, oh, great. I was hoping that Mark was going to really try to dig into my subconscious and what I think about the word wealth. But I'm just making the point that I know where enough of you are about this, because I've been there. And it's going to be difficult to engage in the topic like productively without also challenging your understandings, even in your subconscious, about the word wealth. Okay. I'm going to hit pause because I know that's a big topic. And I'm just going to say within these 4 sessions, I need you to at least assume for the 6 hours, if you can like change your assumptions for 6 hours and say, okay, I'm going to listen to the conversation. I may not agree, but I'm going to listen to the conversation assuming that wealth can be created, not taken. I'm going to ask you to do that because I think it will affect how you hear certain things that I or others or the author of the book says. Okay? I'm going to hit pause before we're going to transition into Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I'm going to make some apologies about the book to start. But before we do that, are y'all tracking with me? 50 minutes in, do you feel like, oh my gosh, my head's spinning? Can I clarify something? Somebody want to shout a disagreement or say they have a moral objection? Any sort of processing or questions that y'all want to throw out there right now?
Hey, Mark, it's Johanna. Can I just process a little bit out loud?
Yes.
So
Please.
I used to be a financial coach, I think some folks may know. And when I think about some of the description, so some of this rings true to what I had to do with my clients as far as changing their mindset. But what I was doing was not teaching them how to be wealthy. Because I didn't have that information even for myself. What I was doing was teaching them budgeting. And so even that required a mindset shift, not only for them, but I was my own first client. It required a mindset shift for myself. And so this is good, kind of getting me back into that, the more correct mindset. It's easy. I feel like it's easy when life and et cetera is happening to slip back into that negative view of having and acquiring and accumulating and creating wealth. So this is kind of getting me back on the good foot.
That's really great. Yeah, and I hope nobody hears me being anti-budgeting. I'm not anti-budgeting. Budgeting's a good practice. I took a shot at Dave Ramsey earlier, so I might take another shot at Dave Ramsey here and explain what I mean by that. And if some of you probably don't even know who Dave Ramsey is, he's got a podcast and a radio show, and he's listened to by probably millions of people around the world. The way that I would describe what Dave Ramsey does, he has acknowledged the primary context that most of us use to think about money, which is monthly budgeting. And he knows that that is a very dangerous method. Because if you think about money in 30-day chunks of time, you won't use debt correctly. You will over leverage. You will take out home equity lines of credit and go on vacation. You will finance cars in the wrong way. You will take on student loan debt without understanding what it is. You will take on credit card debt, consumer debt, medical debt. So this is why Dave Ramsey is so anti-debt. And my issue with Ramsey is that rather than changing the paradigm, which is what I wish he would try to do, he says, okay, if that's your paradigm, you need to be able to slap your own hand when you do this, this, or this. You need to change the behavior, not the mindset. And he knows this, like he's very smart. And he would probably say, well, okay, that's great. That's the ideal, is that you change somebody's mindset, but that's not realistic. So if you can't change the mindset, change the behavior so that someone at least avoids being in debt up to their eyeballs. This is guys, in the United States, the average net worth of someone who makes $100,000 a year is shocking, right? There's plenty of people that make six figures in the United States who are functioning fairly well budget-wise, who don't have a dime of net worth because they haven't changed the paradigm. I'm just looking at a couple of these comments before we transition. Yeah, Sarah, that's really good. Sarah, for those of you that aren't looking at the chat, Sarah said, it'd be great to hear guardrails or filters to make sure your wealth isn't taking. I have such a fear of it being at the expense of others. I'm gonna say, I don't know that we're gonna tackle that here. I'm asking you to open your mind to the possibility that wealth can be about creation rather than taking. But I would also say, if you want to have further conversation about the differences, because all wealth is not created. People can exploit. People can exploit other people. It happens every single day. In our industry, it happens every single day. So I'm not saying wealth is always obtained in ethical ways. It's not. I love that conversation. I value that conversation. I would love to have it. So I might just say, in some other setting, we're probably going to end up having that. Yeah. Silva's getting at the, even in terms of like developing real estate, right? Or kind of quote unquote improving a neighborhood. What does that mean as wealth generation? Okay. So thanks for bearing with me through a little bit of philosophical conversation. I hope in some way it's challenging your thinking a little bit so far. I'm going to transition to chatting a little bit about Rich Dad, Poor Dad and why I had you read that book. If you have read it, if you haven't, I'd encourage you to do so. If I had to pick a list of 5 books that have impacted my life, this is on the list of 5. You guys probably know a few of the others, but this is on that list of 5. And I want to be honest, there's a lot of this book that I don't like. Some of the kind of vibe of the book I don't like. Some of the ways in which the book talks about people I don't care for. There's a little bit of like a political or philosophical undertone to the book, or in some cases not really undertone, just tone, that I don't care for. So I just want to acknowledge that. In addition to the cheesiness, there are some things in the book that make me uncomfortable that I don't agree with. And then there are some things in the book that make me uncomfortable that have radically changed my thinking. So I don't think you have to be a fan of everything in the book, and you could be a harsh critic of quite a few things in the book and still get really good value from what it says. If any of you would be willing, I'd love to hear, if you've read or listened to it recently, what's a highlight for you about the book? What does the book do for you as you read it? I'm acknowledging there's some lowlights, but I'd love to hear a couple highlights. A few of you have individually shared with me what your highlights were. I guess I could call you out and say, tell the class, but I won't do that.
I think for me, I think it's interesting to see how money becomes more as a tool and less as an emotional binding experience. So I think the idea of having money work for you is more about, how do I use this tool that I have to build something, instead of letting it control you or be obsessed with it or just want more of it.
Money as a tool is a really great illustration. If money is a tool, you are in charge versus the money. That's really good. Johanna, yes, I was hoping someone would bring this up. The difference between an asset and a liability. What does he say early in the book about owning your own home? Y'all, come on. This is a group of realtors. I know somebody got a little bit pissed off
He says
when he
it's a
was talking
liability,
about your
right?
home. What did he say, Rosie?
It's a liability.
Yes. Does that offend our sensibility as realtors? A little bit. Rosie says a little bit. I'm getting some nods.
Did he
Yeah.
kind of have that perspective because you tie money up into it and you can't keep that money floating? And he also talked about maintenance.
Yes. And I think Wade hits it pretty succinctly there. If it doesn't make money, it's not an asset. It's a liability. So for any of you that took accounting, a couple of you have accounting degrees, which I don't have. An asset is something that you have. A liability is something that you owe. Okay? A lot of people, when they think about their house, they think the house is the asset. And what's the liability? It's the mortgage. The kind of common mentality about a house is the house is the asset, the liability is the mortgage. This is, yeah, so Jenny, I'm going to come back to this, but this is, I think, a good illustration of how to rethink money. Where do most people in the United States, if they have any net worth to their name, where is the majority of their net worth? It's in their house. And if you buy into the philosophy in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, he's then making the case that most of the public that has net worth has the majority of their net worth in a liability, not in an asset. And he's very careful to say, I think he's very careful to say, he isn't suggesting that you shouldn't own a home. He's not saying owning a home is a foolish decision. Nowhere does he say that. And he actually makes sure he says owning a home is likely the right financial decision for most people because the alternative is to rent. And so if you look at those two alternatives, for most people, the better outcome is going to be to own the real estate because it's likely appreciating and the cost of owning the home in the lifespan is going to be less than the cost of renting. His point is don't talk about your house as your most valuable asset. Talking about your house as a liability that is less of a liability than renting would be. So that's a kind of a small section of the book, but as realtors, I think that's particularly relevant. We talk about buying a house as a good financial decision, and I believe for most people it is, but I think we want to frame that correctly. Any other highlights or things that stuck out to you that you're willing to share about the book? Everyone watch out for Kate's kids when they become adults. They're apparently playing a game called Cash Flow for Kids. So Kate's kids can probably explain what assets and liabilities are, which is amazing. Yeah, Kelly, Kelly makes a really interesting point there. Do y'all know what the term accredited investor means? So if somebody's creating like an investment fund, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, has established this criteria that says if you're creating, most investment funds have to raise capital only from accredited investors. And there's two ways that you can become accredited investor. One is you've made, I think it's if you file individually, you have to have made $200,000 at least 2 years in a row, I believe is the number, or have a net worth of $1 million. But in that calculation, you can't count your primary residence. which is interesting. And I think does come as a surprise for a lot of people. So back to Wade's point that I like his definition of asset as something that generates money, not something that costs you money. So I think that's a little bit of a paradigm shift. Anything else before I give you some thoughts about the book? Any other highlights? One of the things that I have appreciated about the book that I'll admit, I don't necessarily like the method of delivery of this, but I think is a really good point. What stands out to you about the Poor Dad? If you read the title, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and you thought to yourself, okay, I think this book is going to be about a kid explaining that he had two dads, one of whom was rich, one of whom was poor. What would surprise you about the Poor Dad in the book? Yeah. Thanks, Silva. I mean, you've nailed it. How educated he was. Right? I think multiple advanced degrees, works in academia, highly educated. And I think there is parts of the book that kind of come across as like shaming or demeaning to people that hold certain mindsets about money. And I don't find that helpful. I don't think you have to use that method to deliver this message. So I wish they would change that. But I think the highlight there for me that I hope you can take away is the amount of education that someone has is probably not a great predictor for how they think about money. It probably is a good predictor about how much money they make on a monthly or annual basis. It's surprisingly not a great predictor for how they think about wealth. And so I think that validates what we've talked about our education system, and whether that's a problem or not is a conversation for another day. I think it's just a reality. One other thing that I would highlight from the book, and again, we're going to hit this a couple times, is just this concept that most people are conditioned to think about money as a what am I earning and what am I spending thing. I think he does a good job of illustrating this in a couple ways. So if you are listening to me talk about income and expense versus wealth generation, and it doesn't compute to you, if you're like, I don't get that concept, read or listen to this book a couple times, because I think it communicates it well, and that's the key difference. He had one dad that taught him to think about money as something that you earn or spend, and he had one dad that taught him to think about money as an asset that generates wealth. And that made an enormous difference. And so that's the mindset shift that I think this book does a good job of conveying, even if I don't like some of the methods that it uses. Okay, so transitioning here for the last 20 minutes to talk about why does this matter for realtors? I think it matters for anybody. I don't think your vocation is definitive as to whether this matters. But I do believe it is particularly relevant and applicable to realtors. I'm going to give you a couple of reasons why. But when somebody asks you, what do you do for a living? What do you do? What's your job? What do you say? You say, I'm a realtor. You might explain it. I might work in real estate. I help people buy and sell houses. I've always tried to explain to my 7-year-old what I do. And he now understands a little bit about the concept of money, so he understands people that are buying houses. But I used to talk about that I help people trade houses. So I think his vision was that, like, I found two people that were willing to trade houses with each other. That was his concept of what I did. It's kind of what we do, right? Yeah, that's what you say. Internally, somebody says, what do you do for a living? Is your internal answer any different? Is your internal answer, I'm a realtor, that's what I do for a living? Hypothetical. I think for most of us, our internal answer is probably the same as our external answer. That I get paid to help people either buy or sell a house. That's my job. I have a job. That's what I do for a living. And I think this is why the concept of wealth versus cash flow matters so much for a realtor. You are a small business owner. That is what you do for a living. My hypothesis is that we are, as a part of thinking about money and its income and expenses, if we're conditioned to think about money that way, we're conditioned to think about vocation as a job that has income, okay? And that a small business owner is a little bit more likely to think about wealth generation, to think about capital as something that is an asset, not something that you earn and spend, but something that you build. And I'm going to illustrate this a couple ways. If I walked into a room and there's 100 small business owners from 100 different industries sitting in that room, and I just started walking around the room and I said, hey, tell me what a profit loss statement is. And tell me what a balance sheet is. And what's your personal net worth? A lot of people will probably be offended if I ask them what their personal net worth is. Y'all, I'm going to ask you to comment in the chat later what your personal net worth is. I'm not going to do that. But if I went around a room of 100 business owners and I said, tell me what a profit, Andy knows it. I love it. And Andy's is 7. We're gonna come back to that. Knowing is more than half the battle for you G.I. Joe fans. But if I walked around to 100 business owners and said, tell me what a profit loss is, what a balance sheet is, and what your personal net worth is. I've never done this. I can't validate this, but I'm very confident that this is true. You could correlate their answers to what industries they're in. The degree to which someone understands a profit and loss and a balance sheet, the relationship between the two, and what their personal net worth is. You could correlate that to what industry they're a small business owner in. And if I were to rank them, 100 different industries, all small business owners, and I were to say, like, okay, I'm going to try to rank which industries were the most consciously aware of their own profit loss balance sheets, how they related to each other, what their personal financial statement was, what their net worth was, which industries were ranked the best versus the worst. Where do you think I'd put realtors? Really close to the bottom. And this is not me being critical. I'm not judging or shaming. So I hope you don't hear that. I'm just trying to acknowledge the reality here. And I think a part of this is because we're small business owners that act like we have a job. Most of you don't have a job. If I'm breaking that news to you, I'm sorry. Most of you don't have a job. Rosie has a job, I guess. Gigi has a job. Michelle has a job. Most of you don't have jobs. You're small business owners. But we're in an industry that doesn't think of itself as small business owners, and that limits our capacity. And so I'm going to try to tie these two things together and say, this is why I think this is particularly relevant for realtors. Jobs train you to think about money as income and expense. And again, this isn't conspiracy. I'm just speaking reality. If you think about money as income and expense, it is to your employer's benefit. That is exactly what an employer wants their employees to be thinking. Why? Because if they're thinking about it in terms of income and expense and not wealth generation, they're going to have to work for that employer for the rest of their life. Employees are conditioned to think that way. Business owners may or may not think that way, but they're a little bit more likely to think about wealth generation, but realtors don't think of themselves as business owners. And so if I were to put on a spectrum, so the kind of the first entry point in this is, can you understand a profit loss? I think most realtors can probably understand a profit loss, because a profit loss is about income and expenses. So it fits the criteria for how we've been conditioned to think about money. A balance sheet. Balance sheet is a statement of financial worth, of accumulated value. Okay, we're going to tackle what a profit loss and a balance sheet is in the second session. I'm just illustrating why I think realtors have such a long way to go in this, is that most realtors couldn't articulate to you what a balance sheet is and how it's different from a profit loss. And if I went into a room of 100 small business owners, those that couldn't explain to me the difference between a balance sheet and a profit loss, I'm gonna say, you better have a genius business idea. Because if you don't know the difference between those two as a small business owner, I'm probably not super confident that your business is gonna make it. And it doesn't matter how hard of a worker you are, you're gonna have to have something genius to make it if you can't articulate the difference between those two. Some very specific outcomes. So, okay, that's my stupid hypothetical example of 100 business owners, but let's focus in on realtors for a second. How do I see this playing out? I see realtors making a ton of money that have no or very little tax strategy. You know what most realtors' tax strategy is? What's the balance of my bank account on April 14th? That's a really bad strategy. That's better than none. No strategy is April 14th, you realize you owe $50,000 to the IRS and you don't have it. If you don't think it happens in real estate, it does. Come April 2021, this is record year for MIBOR, right? In Central Indiana, there's more realtors that made more money this year than they ever have in the past. Record year for a bunch of people. I can guarantee you that on April 15th, there's going to be a bunch of realtors saying, oh shit. Not only have I not thought about reducing my legal tax liability, but I don't even have the cash. So I'm not talking about having the cash. I'm talking about really, truly strategic tax mitigation. Guys, I talked to a friend of mine. This is not a hypothetical. This is a real example. This week, I talked to a friend of mine in the industry who just had an incredible year. They will probably net $500,000 or $600,000. He has no tax strategy. He's probably going to owe the IRS $100,000 in April. Now, is that bad news? Look, he made $500,000. So I'm not feeling bad for him right now, but he's been in the business for 20 years. He's really, really good. That's crazy. In other industries, that would be viewed as crazy. So no or bad tax strategy. I think one of the results for us is not knowing the difference between balance sheet and profit loss is that we don't know the right criteria to use to decide whether we should invest money in our business. Our criteria for investing money in our business ends up being, do I have money and what's my sales goal? Those aren't terrible criteria, by the way. If you're going to invest money in your business, you better have it. And you better know what your goals are. So those are, they're good criteria, but they're limited because you're thinking about money still in a bit in terms of cash flow. So it's expense rather than investment. So I think we're using limited criteria to think about spending money. Really advanced financial thinking is able to project out the spending of money years and years in advance and look at it a little bit differently. I've got a lot of room to grow in this, but I think realtors in general aren't very good at it. Third example, this is going to come across as a bit of a low blow, but y'all bear with me for a moment. Do you find realtors to be generous people? I saw it. Good answer, Silva. Thank you. I planted that answer. Silva said only at Platt. It's not a true statement, but I appreciate the sentiment. I got a lot of head shaking no. Lance says not in general. Angelica says the ones I know, which is interesting. I think there's no, I don't see a moral or ethical correlation in the like heart or motivation of people in our industry towards generosity. So what I mean by that is I don't think realtors are any more or less generous in spirit or by desire. I think you're just as likely or unlikely to be generous as any other profession, okay? However, I think there are professions that give more money than realtors. Why? Yeah. Tyler nailed it in one word. Tyler, would you unmute yourself and tell me what you mean by that? Sorry to single you out. He said stability is the line.
I just think our income kind of fluxes month to month, year to year. So I think people who generally know what to expect with their annual income can make a plan of giving with easier than we can without really knowing exactly what we're going to earn year to year. So.
Nailed it. Thank you, Tyler. I think that is totally true. I think our best intentions to be generous as realtors, and I know lots of realtors who are very generous, but I think realtors actually probably want to be more generous than they are. But if we don't have predictable income and our primary means of thinking about generosity is monthly cash flow, which is how we're conditioned to think about it, we're going to limit the amount that we can be generous, even though we make pretty damn good money. And so I think this is one of the ways, this isn't like a moral encouragement that realtors should be more generous in spirit. That's a totally different conversation. I'm saying our lack of financial literacy as small business owners limits the amount that we can be generous because our income is not predictable and we can't change that. Okay, I've got 6 minutes left. Guys, I know this is, particularly in a video context, it can be hard to follow. I really appreciate you tracking to the degree that you have. We're gonna look, so the next 2 classes, the second and third sessions, will feel much more like very specific content. We're gonna spend quite a bit of time looking at a profit loss and a balance sheet and a personal financial statement. And you're gonna, many of you know what those are. I encourage you to come still if you can, because hopefully you'll be able to get something from that and you'll have very specific applications. But I hope that this frames up that conversation effectively. I think you have to address your subconscious and your underlying philosophy about money to really truly benefit from the nuts and bolts of what's a profit loss and what's a personal financial statement and why does it matter and what are some good tax strategies. I think you have to hit the philosophical first. In the last 5 minutes, comments or questions, things that you think we missed or things that in a couple of minutes here you wish someone could clarify for you. Well, I'll leave you with a couple thoughts. Number one is I would invite, and I mean this, I would invite any of you any time to reach out to me to ask to talk more in person about this. A mentor of mine continues to give me very valuable time and conversation. And I think this is one of the ways in which we can kind of shift cultural thinking about money is to be willing to talk about it. So if at any time you want to tackle that in person, I'm offering you my time if it's helpful. Okay, I'm not assuming it is, but if you think it is, then you've got it. Number two, I'm gonna beat this horse dead. If by the end of 4 sessions, you have shifted your thinking about money from 30-day periods of time to a lifetime perspective of wealth, then the 4 sessions worked. Because I believe that will have, I'm not oversaying this, I believe it will alter your life. I think that is a life-changing mentality shift, and it's not a one-time thing. You have to continually recondition, right? So if there's like this conversion experience, that's a weird way to say it, but if there's this one big mentality shift, that can happen, but still for the rest of your life, you're surrounded by things that condition you to think about money as budgeting, not wealth. So this is not something you arrive at. It is something that happens, but then something that you have to have continual kind of reinforcement of. And so I think that's my hope, is that mentality shift happens or continues to happen for you. And that then we find a way to take that mentality shift and drop it into the context of being a realtor. Mindset shift, drop it into the context of being a realtor who is a small business owner. That's the goal. Rosie, take it away.
Yeah, I just want to let you guys know that Mark is going to be sending some stuff out afterwards, just some more resources for you and probably some activities for you guys to complete in your own time. So I took note of everyone who was on this call, so we'll make sure that gets to you. If you are watching this as a recording, please email me or text me and make sure that I add you to that list so we can get you that information too. So that's all I have, but thanks. This was phenomenal.
Good reminder, Rosie. Real quick, I'm going to send out something about profit, loss, and balance sheet. That's going to be a main context for us in the next session. Here's what I would say. If you can at least define those 2 documents and know what you're looking at, you probably don't need to spend a bunch of time digesting what I send out. If you're thinking, I don't even know what those words mean, the content I'm going to send out is for you to spend some time in between now and the next session. Cool? Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.